When I travel to Southern California, my primary reason for doing so is always going to be Disneyland. Despite whatever issues I have with Disney in regards to how they run the park, or with its companion park of California Adventure, there's still so much charm and a lot to like in Walt's original creation. However, an experience that isn't as well known to people outside of California would be Knott's Berry Farm, a theme park with a pretty rich history and interesting selection of attractions. The park is currently owned by Cedar Fair, and as such, has pivoted more towards thrills. Even so, Knott's manages to retain a lot of its old Western theming, especially with Cedar Fair preserving the ghost town area of the park. It's definitely something different, preserving actual old buildings and working to immerse visitors into a town full of interactive actors. Each building contains something unique and different, whether it be shops, stables, or some educational element. Ghost Town will also go through seasonal changes, as you can see here, as I visited during Halloween season and the buildings were decorated accordingly. With this came a change to the costumes of the characters, portraying ghosts in the daytime and putting a creepier spin on some of the interactions. However, Knott's continues to shine outside of Ghost Town as well. Its Western theming extends to a large part of the park, whether it be with a wooden coaster Ghost Rider, the B&M invert known as Silver Bullet, the Mexican-themed Fiesta Village, or the interesting historic dark rides that are still standing. Cedar Fair isn't exactly known for theming, but I do appreciate that they were willing to let these rides still stand and have actually continued to upgrade them throughout the last decade. The park and these attractions actually have a significant and historic role to play, not just in the history of theme parks, but in also inspiring much of Disneyland. Still, they tend to be overlooked because they can come off as a bit dated. Today, I would like to take a quick look at these more obscure but still immensely interesting attractions, covering a bit of their history and exploring why they're worth a visit to Knott's Berry Farm. In the early years of Knott's, the park was mostly focused on recreating a realistic depiction of the Old West. The goal of the park, which essentially just consisted of Ghost Town, was to educate guests by emulating what life might be like in that era. Actors would roam around the town, and activities such as gold panning would showcase life as it was during the California Gold Rush. While not offering traditional amusement rides, Knott's would also contain the Ghost Town and Calico Railroad, using a real authentic steam train, along with what appears to be stagecoach rides. A young engineer who specialized in building small, recreational trains, known as Bud Hurlbut, would propose selling one of his trains to Walter Knott in the 1950s, but was rejected due to Knott being wary of adding amusements to his more authentic experience. However, as Disneyland was set to open in 1955, Knott would become concerned that he would lose tourists. Because of this, he opted to slowly add more attractions, contracting individual concessionaires. Hurlbut would eventually become a concessionaire himself, and would first start by operating a classic 1896 Dental Menagerie Carousel, but would expand his operations to other attractions he would build himself in the late 1950s. However, in November of 1960, he would premiere one of the most influential attractions in the theme park industry, the Calico Mine Ride. Using an electric engine dressed up to look like a small steam locomotive, the attraction would take visitors through a mountain and into a series of impressive dark ride scenes that depicted workers in a gold mine. It was very much designed to be as authentic and educational as possible, taking a lot of inspiration from real mines and incorporating obscure details to really immerse visitors. As an example, the first tunnel you go through is reinforced with wood that turns with the track. It's easy to dismiss this as a decorative feature, but it has explicit purpose in the ride. The narrator explains that the wood protects miners from falling rocks, but also curves like a real tunnel as miners would dig in the direction of a vein. Again, it's easy to dismiss as just mining theming along the curve of the track, but every single feature of the ride has purpose reflected behind it. Here's another example.
As our train starts back up, we pass new diggings. These are called stopes in mining. The men have dug up so far, they're out of sight.
To the average person, it might just look like an alcove in the rockwork with some props thrown in. However, as with every other element of the ride, it has real purpose in emulating the work environment of an actual mine from the era. Many of the larger scenes would depict workers in the mine, and while their static nature is perfectly fine, the attraction would eventually upgrade them to animatronics, though I have had difficulty pinpointing exactly when this was. However, the ride was most recently refurbed by Garner Holt in 2014, updating all the effects and bringing it to its current state. The attraction first starts under a covered station and moves into the mountain, where you will notice the aforementioned reinforced tunnels. Soon you will encounter a miner, warning you that if you want to stake a claim, you better have brought your own picks and shovels. From here, the Calico Mine Ride moves into its first large scene, depicting large steaming mud pots that would pose a danger to miners. Going forward, you'll notice various details throughout the mine until you reach its heart, inhabited by a massive scene depicting the work of miners on multiple levels. Here, activity is most prevalent because this is where the largest gold deposits were found. However, this scene was intended to give riders a small glimpse of the scale you'll see on the ride, and so the train continues forward. Through another tunnel, riders will travel over an underground lake, where they can spot blind, subterranean fish, and a miner using the water to sift through his pan. Further on, the train will pass by more waterfalls, as well as a miner utilizing a pressurized hose to portray a hydraulic mining technique, which is a more recent addition to the ride. Next, the train will travel to the very bottom of the mine, where miners are continuing to dig, as well as working on reinforcing their tunnels through a technique called square set timbering. From here, the train will climb a lift hill, which leaves an interesting impression. Because the attraction is so old, you'll have to hold onto the side of the car you're in, or else you'll slide back into the person behind you. It's a small, unintentional element, but it is an ironically charming reminder of an era with fewer standards for ride safety. As you continue up, you'll see a miner holding a canary in a cage, as well as bats added to the alcove previously mentioned earlier. Once the train crests the top, it will move into the dark where the narrator will ask for more light. Suddenly, the cavern will illuminate as an impressive scene emulating natural cave formations comes into view, and the iconic organ piece, titled as "Going to Heaven," echoes throughout. Improvised by American film composer Gaylord Carter, it has become an iconic element of this scene, and has been re-recorded throughout the years as the ride has been updated. Upon exiting the cavern, riders will pass by figures who are perplexed by glowing rocks that they've encountered, as well as a prospector who has struck it rich. Continuing forward, the train will now pass through the heart of the mine again, but now at the top, it gives riders new perspective on the absolutely massive scale of the scene, as well as providing views of other elements that were previously not visible to the train. After passing a few more figures, the train will move outside of the mountain and travel along a trestle, offering unique views of the park and adding a bit of kineticism for people looking up at the attraction from outside. Upon re-entering the mountain, the train will pass through the heart of the mine again, before then entering a tunnel where signs and miners will warn that active dynamite blasting is occurring ahead. It's too late though, and the train will pick up speed as it travels downhill, and the mine begins to collapse as dynamite is set off. Quickly escaping the explosion, the train makes it back outside and returns to the station where riders will disembark. The Calico Mine Ride may come off as a bit dated and its animatronics a bit stiff, even though they're relatively new, but it's still an interesting attraction for those who really enjoy dark rides. It also cannot be overstated how influential the attraction was on the development of Disneyland going forward. While the idea of creating an ambitious mountain facade wasn't unique to Hurlbut, as Disneyland would open the Matterhorn just a year prior, it did set the precedent for many other attractions. Now of course, one could argue that Disneyland's Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland was probably an inspiration for the Calico Mine Ride. I agree that it likely built off of ideas found there, but that still shouldn't discount the importance of how Calico pushed attraction design forward. One notable design element is that it was a slow-moving ride that lacked a defining narrative. Instead, it allowed riders to glimpse many elaborate scenes of miners and focused heavily on atmosphere and scale. The Walt Disney Company today likes to pretend that Knott's Berry Farm had no influence on the development of Disneyland, but it's clear how the Calico Mine Ride would inspire Disney classics such as Pirates of the Caribbean or The Haunted Mansion. In fact, Walt Disney was friends with Walter Knott and would often visit the park to determine how crowd flow worked, shaping his own ideas in managing park operations, and undoubtedly inspiring elements and attractions of Frontierland. The Calico Mine Ride is also notable for featuring the first hidden switchback queue, blending in with the theming of the mountain and traveling under the ride track, something that would also inspire Imagineers in other attractions going forward. Today though, the Calico Mine Ride is a bit of a mixed bag. While I still think it's quite interesting, its original iteration was much more focused and educational. As it has continued to age though, many elements have been added for the sake of updating the attraction, often messing with the pacing and making its scenes feel less distinct. For example, after exiting the illuminated caverns, the 2014 editions of the Miners with Glowing Rocks and the Prospector have worked to distract riders from the splendor of the previous scene. The original ride was purposefully designed to give riders time to process the impressive scale of the scenery before then returning to the heart of the mine, but that pacing has now been dampened a bit. Still, if you enjoy dark rides, the Calico Mine Ride is worth traveling out of your way for, and is notably historic in its influence on the theme park industry. Quickly, before we continue forward though, if you've stayed invested in the video for this long, I would like to ask you the favor of hitting the like button. It really helps the video reach a wider audience, and if you're interested in theme park content like this but aren't yet subscribed, I also recommend doing that as well. After Hurlbut would construct and successfully operate the Calico Mine Ride, he would once again be inspired to create another attraction based around California history. This time he wanted to focus on the logging industry, which had helped build the boomtowns of the gold rush. To achieve this, he wanted to create a ride system similar to the log flumes that loggers would actually use to transport lumber, but because of how dangerous riding in a flume would actually be, the original idea was for a roller coaster with log-shaped cars. However, Hurlbut would speak with Aero Development, and they would start to design a new ride system that was inspired by actual log flumes. Yet Hurlbut's proposal for the ride would be rejected by Knott multiple times, and so the first actual log flume premiered at Six Flags Over Texas as El Asadero in 1963. However, after a complicated few years, Hurlbut would eventually receive permission to finally build his themed log flume attraction, and it would open as the Calico Log Ride in July of 1969. For decades, the attraction delighted visitors, showing the life of lumberjacks in the 19th century, and utilizing real taxidermy animals to fill in the forest scenes. I can't find the specific date for this, but the name of the ride was later changed to the Timber Mountain Log Ride. In addition to this, Garner Holt would come in and update the ride in a significant way in 2013, replacing static figures with animatronics, and adding in plenty of new scenes, which brings the ride to its current iteration today. The ride starts off outside, moving up a lift hill and into a lumber mill. This first scene is also pretty straightforward, showcasing workers in the mill. Leaving through a small drop, the log would continue traveling through the flume around the mountain, offering scenic views of the park and of the attraction itself. Upon re-entering the mountain, the log will move through a forest scene that depicts the lumberjacks chopping down wood and encountering wolves. From here, the log once again travels outside, where you move along the exterior of the mill, witnessing more animatronic figures. The riders continue taking a scenic journey along the outside of the mountain, before then entering through a cave. In the darkness, the log suddenly drops into a cavern filled with water and fed by waterfalls. As you continue out of the cave, riders now find themselves in the middle of a forest inhabited by various animals. This scene is also rather comedic, showing a camper being terrorized as the animals tear apart his campsite, and riders will also pass by both a grizzly bear and a mountain lion. Traveling through another cave tunnel, the log will then pass through a logger's hootenanny, showcasing log rolling, moonshine drinking, and various other comedic scenes. The log will then travel up the last lift hill, where it will first move through another lumber mill, and towards the end, riders will be warned about dynamite blasting going on at the top. As the dynamite is ignited, riders will crest the top of the hill, and plunge down a 42-foot drop into the water below, then moving around a bend and returning back to the station. In my opinion, in its updated form, the Timber Mountain Log Ride is the superior dark ride in comparison to the Calico Mines. As someone who isn't particularly fond of water rides either, I also enjoy they don't get excessively wet, which can definitely be a problem with other attractions. Sometimes I just want to enjoy the theming and story of an attraction, but as with something like Deadly Do Right's Ripsaw Falls, the cost of getting absolutely soaked just isn't worth it. The Timber Mountain Log Ride will certainly get you wet, but not to the point of ruining your day. Like the Calico Mine Ride, Timber Mountain can certainly come off as a bit dated with stiff animatronics, but it's still a great experience and has a lot of historical value. Despite not being the first log flume, the development of the ride system couldn't have happened without Hurlbut proposing his idea to Arrow, and it's definitely the first themed log flume to exist. In addition to this, it's also pretty well known that former Imagineer Tony Baxter was not just a huge fan of the attraction, but definitely was inspired by it when he worked to create Splash Mountain for Disneyland. Like the Calico Mine Ride, Timber Mountain is certainly another reason to go out of your way to visit Knott's if you're a fan of dark rides. With this being said, let's move on to one last great attraction located in the park. In 1975, Knott's would open a dark ride in the back of the park known as Knott's Berry Tales, which took riders through an animal-driven story. Here they would witness a boysenberry pie thief known as Crafty Coyote, thwarted by the heroic duo of Boysen and Girlson. Not a lot of footage exists from this attraction, but it would close in 1986. The following year, it was then replaced by Kingdom of the Dinosaurs, another dark ride that would run until 2004. In 2015, the building would then open with a new 3D shooter-based attraction known as Voyage to the Iron Reef, and with such poor reception, only lasted until 2020, before then using the same ride system, but reopening as Knott's Berry Tales returned to the fair in May of 2021. I can say that this is absolutely one of the worst attractions I've ever been on, as it has abysmal capacity and slow loading procedures. The ride itself is also remarkably boring, especially since the shooting mechanic on my boysenberry blaster just, well, didn't work. So this is Knott's third dark ride currently in the park, and it is just absolutely terrible. However, while not a dark ride, Knott's actually does offer another really interesting themed attraction, which very much fits in with the Calico Mine Ride and Timber Mountain. In 1987, Knott's would open a pretty decent scenic river rapids attraction near Ghost Town, known as Bigfoot Rapids. However, in 2018, the ride would shut down for a refurb and open a year later, now including a fun slate of new scenes and Garner Holt animatronics found throughout the ride. Having been renamed to the Calico River Rapids, it has new additions such as rattlesnakes, howling wolves, fishing grizzly bears, an explosive TNT scene, Bigfoot, and plenty of others. It's a great refresh for an already decent attraction, adding a lot of interesting elements and enhancing the overall ride experience. A while ago, I produced a video where I spoke about Disney's California Adventure, analyzing the flaws of the park when it first opened. I really liked the idea of that original park, and offered suggestions for how it could have been improved, rather than just throwing up meaningless IP everywhere. One of my favorite attractions in the park is Grizzly River Run because it's a great scenic raft ride, but even so, I felt that it could have been improved with some more distinct scenes, including some grizzly bear animatronics. I was surprised to see a fair number of people push back on this idea because they felt an update like that would take away from the scenery, but I think that Knott's proves my point that this would be pretty cool. While it can be easy to miss a lot of the animatronics through the ride if you're not looking for them, they definitely add to and enhance this already great attraction. Even something as simple as fishing grizzly bears would also be a great addition to Grizzly River Run. So while not a dark ride, the Calico River Rapids very much fits in with the adventurous western theme of Knott's Berry Farm. also working to round out the experience and complements both the Calico Mine Ride and Timber Mountain. The park's theming certainly isn't perfect in some of the areas, and its notoriously poor ride operations leave a lot to be desired. However, if you're a theme park and dark ride fan, hopefully I've encouraged you to visit Knott's Berry Farm for these fantastic original rides. They certainly seem to stand on their own without IP shoved into them, because Cedar Fair seems to recognize that this park is a special place. Knott's Berry Farm is a staple of Southern California, and Cedar Fair has shown that they're willing to put meaningful investment into the park, updating and preserving its important history. So, with all of this being said, if you enjoyed the video, I would like to once again ask you to leave a like. If you haven't already, and you want to continue seeing more theme park video essays like this, I strongly encourage you to subscribe and hit the bell icon so as to be notified to new videos as they release.
Thank you.